All right, we're going to talk about the surprising power of small habits, talk about growth, talk about improvement, what it takes to get better. But to do that, or before we jump into the science of how habits work and the science of how we can change our behavior, I want to talk a little bit about self-judgment. And the reason I want to talk about it is because self-judgment is one of the things that can hold us back from growth, one of the most common things that can hold us back from growth. Since we have a basketball crowd, let's say you're shooting, you shoot a free throw and you miss, and the first thing you think is, oh, that's a bad shot, right? You start judging the shot. It's not necessarily a good thing because you're preventing yourself from learning from the experience because you're so in your head judging the experience, right? You're too busy assessing whether or not it's good or bad. And I'll be vulnerable. When I first met Brene Brown, who's great if you are not familiar with her work, she said, your experience here today will only be as great as your willingness to be vulnerable. And I would say we could say that about this experience as well, right? The willingness to be vulnerable that you have for this whole thing is going to determine how much you're going to get out of it. And so I'll share a little bit. How awesome was Steve last night? It was great, wasn't he? It was awesome. And when he got done, I was like, man, I am not going to be like that on stage. And I felt bad about that for a little bit. And so what I was doing there is what you do when you judge yourself after you miss a shot. I was practicing this self-judgment, right? I was getting in the way of my ability to do the work and share my own message because I was too busy criticizing myself. Instead, I would like us today to think more about being like a rose bush, being a seed, right? When you plant a seed, you don't criticize it for being small, for being rootless and stemless, and then it sprouts out of the ground, it's a little bud. You don't criticize it for not being a bush yet or not being fully grown. But at each step along the way, it's exactly what it needs to be. And the reason that this is important is because we often judge ourselves, right, based on where we're at. I'm not there yet. I'm not a good enough free throw shooter. I'm not a good enough speaker. I'm not good enough in my business. I'm not good enough at relationships, whatever it happens to be. And we're so busy judging ourselves. And this is actually enforced by the way that society treats a lot of things, right? It's like you're never supposed to be satisfied. You're never supposed to be done. You need to be driven. And we often associate being driven and being dissatisfied as being the same thing. I don't think that has to be the case though, because if you take the rose seed, if you take the bush, it never stops growing because that's just what it does, it grows. And so I would like us to take that philosophy into this next hour where we don't judge ourselves for where we're at. We're perfect whatever stage of our growth we happen to be in, but we never stop growing because that's just what we do. We're like the seed, right? That's just who we are. So, in order to start this off, I want to talk a little bit about Team Sky. I met a couple people from the UK last night who are probably familiar with this story. In the mid-2000s, Team Sky is Great Britain's professional cycling team. And they hired a man named Dave Brailsford. And at the time, they had a pretty middle-of-the-road record when it comes to performance on the world cycling stage. They had never won a Tour de France. And they brought Brailsford in and they said, we want to change that. What's your strategy? What's your plan? And Brailsford believed in this concept that he called the aggregation of marginal gains. The way that he described it was the 1% improvement in nearly everything that you do. So they started by making 1% improvements in a lot of areas you would expect a cycling team to make. They got slightly lighter tires for the bike. They built a more ergonomic seat. They had their outdoor riders wear indoor racing suits, which were lighter and more aerodynamic. They had their riders wear biofeedback sensors so they could see how each person responded to the type of training that they were doing. But then they did a bunch of things that you wouldn't expect a cycling team to do. They taught their team how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of infection. They figured out the type of pillow that led to the best night's sleep and then brought it on the road with them to hotels. They split tested different massage gels to see which one led to the best muscle recovery. And Brailsford said, all right, if we can execute on this strategy, if we can aggregate all these tiny little 1% changes, then I think that we can win a Tour de France in about 5 years. He ended up being wrong. They won the Tour de France in 3 years, and then they repeated again in the 4th year with a different rider. And when Brailsford coached the Great Britain cycling team at the Olympics in London in 2012, they won 70% of the gold medals available. And so this idea is central to what we're going to be talking about today. This idea that 1% gains and getting 1% better each day actually is not just a tiny improvement, but adds up to something very significant over the long run. And it's just basic math. If you look at getting 1% better for 365 days in a row, you end up 37 times better by the end of the year. Meanwhile, if you make a slightly worse choice, a tiny mistake, a little error, a small lapse in judgment, and make a 1% worse decision each day, you almost whittle yourself all the way down to 0. And this narrow gap between 1% better and 1% worse, this is the stuff that ends up adding up and making us either champions or standing in second place or not even in the conversation at all, right? Now, getting better every single day is not reasonable, even for the most consistent and most dedicated of us in the crowd. However, if you want to get 10 times better at something, you just need to get 1% better for 232 days out of the year. So that's 5 days a week, 46 weeks a year. That leaves you 6 days for holidays, vacation, being lazy, making excuses, whatever it happens to be, right? But if you get better for those 46 weeks a year, those 5 days a week, and you take weekends off, and if you make 1% improvements, you're going to end up 10 times better by the end of the year than you would have been before. Now, so the key idea here is that small habits and tiny gains actually add up to something very significant in a surprisingly short period of time, right? They can multiply into meaningful results very quickly. If we believe this, if we're going to buy into this, then the next question is, how do we do that, right? How do we execute on that? And that's what the practical part, the next phase of this presentation is going to be about. We're going to answer 3 questions. So first, why do some habits stick and others fail? What's the deal? How do habits work? How can we get into our own psychology? Why are we able to build some behaviors and not build others? Second, how do I know what to change? If I buy into this idea that 1% improvements make a difference, then how do I pick, right? We can spend our ways, our attention, and our energy in an infinite number of ways. How do I decide what to focus on? And third, how do I get started and take action? And if you know these 3 things, if you know why and how habits work, if you know what you're going to try to change, and you know how to take action, I don't know what more you could want from a bald man on a Saturday morning, right? So first, I'd like to say thanks to a couple people. These are some people who have significantly influenced my work. BJ Fogg, Leo Babauta, Nir Eyal, Dan Party, Scott Adams, Kelly McGonigal. I just mention them because they're researchers, they're behind the scenes, they often don't get the credit. A lot of these people work at Stanford or other universities, and I think it's important to cite the sources that have influenced my thinking and work. Thank you. All right, so part 1, why some habits stick and others fail. I'd like to start by talking about a research study, and this, for those of you who aren't familiar with my work or haven't read a lot of my articles, the typical flow, and the flow of this talk as well, is going to be some kind of story. We're going to back it up with scientific study or research. I try to base the majority of what I talk about in some type of proven academic study, and then distill it down to a practical insight, something you can take home and actually use. And so that's going to be the flow, and we're just going to repeat that time after time as we go through this presentation. This particular study came from Princeton University, and most people are familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan stopping along the side of the road to help a fallen person, help someone in need. Well, Princeton, their theology school, decided to run this experiment. They brought in a bunch of theology students. They said, all right, we're all familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. We're going to break you up into groups, and you're going to go teach in different rooms across campus. You're going to teach this story. And so they started talking about how to deliver the presentation and so on. And they had a couple different cohorts. The one cohort, they said, all right, just go ahead and go off and deliver the presentation. So they went off to their rooms. The second one, though, they did something interesting. They sent the group off, but on their way to they sent the group off and they said, by the way, we're running a little bit behind, right? You don't have very long to get there. It takes about 10 minutes. You only got 5, so we kind of need to hurry. You're probably already going to be late. So they're in a rush. They know they're going to go give this presentation. On the way, they planted an actor on the campus. And this actor is laying on the ground, hurt, moaning in pain. And so they scream twice, and then they cry out. And every single group went right past the person in need to go give a presentation about helping a person in need. Right? The one person even stepped over the guy who was in pain in order to get there. Now, the point of this, and what I'd like to start talking about now, is the danger of being goal-focused and goal-oriented. These people had a goal, right, to deliver a presentation. And they were so one-sided, so narrow-minded, so focused on that goal that they missed the bigger picture and the perspective of what they should have been doing in the first place. And I think that this can be a danger of goals often. And so instead, I would like to encourage us to focus on systems rather than goals. Here are some examples. If you're a coach, your goal is to win a championship, but your system is what your team does at practice each day. If you're a writer, your goal might be to write a book, maybe even write a best-selling book, but your system is how you write each week, the schedule that you follow. If you're an entrepreneur, your goal could be to build $1 million business or a $10 million business, but the system is the sales and marketing process that you have. The systems are what actually make the difference. They're what drive the results. And what I've seen, having goals is great. Having a vision, having a dream is nice. It's important to know where you're going and where you're headed. It's important to have some clarity of focus, to know that we're moving in this direction. But once you know that, having the goal on paper makes very little difference. And committing to the system and showing up every day drives a lot of results. And so I'd like to talk about how we can build these systems and repeat these habits day after day, week after week. The first thing that I'd like to encourage us to think about is how goals and repetitions actually get you to any outcome that you want. So let's say that you have a goal of squatting 300 pounds, all right? Point A might be squatting 100 pounds, and it doesn't take very many repetitions to get there. Maybe you have to be in the gym for, 6 months, a year, whatever it happens to be. Maybe you can do it right now. Point B could be squatting 200 pounds. It's gonna take some more repetitions to get there. Point C is much further down the line, take even more. But once you realize this, the only thing that you have to do is put your reps in. The only thing that it comes down to is committing to the system and performing day after day. So habits in this way take you wherever you want to go. All right, how long does it take? This is a common question that people have about building habits. So there was a study done at University College London. They looked at a variety of different habits. On average, they found that it takes 66 days for a new habit to stick. 66 days to build a new habit. This had a really wide range though. Sometimes the habits were very small, like drinking a glass of water at lunch. Sometimes they were much more significant, like going for a run after work each day. The lesson to take away from this is that the range was anywhere from 3 weeks to 8 months. And so if you're looking to build a new habit, if you're looking to install a new behavior in your life, then you can pretty much commit to the fact that this is going to take months, right? This is a lifestyle that we're trying to build. It's not 21 days and then you're done. It's not a 30-day program that it's like, we did it, habits built, don't need to worry about it anymore. There's some point, which on the vertical axis we have behavior automaticity, so how automatic something is, how little you have to think about it. And then on the horizontal axis, the number of repetitions you need to do. The more reps you do, the more automatic the behavior becomes. And at some point, you get to that little habit line where it tips over, and suddenly, this is automatic now. So again, we're talking about focusing on the number of repetitions that you do, the system that you build, so that you can make this behavior more automatic and more routine. There are a lot of different habit models, some from the people that I mentioned earlier. Lewin's equation, operant conditioning is a very famous one by B.F. Skinner. Tiny habits model, loop model, hook model, blah, blah, blah. The only reason I list all these here is so that you understand that there are a lot of different ways of thinking about habits, but we're gonna break one down right now, probably the most popular assessment of how habits and behavior work. All of these share things in common, so if you hear people talking about this is the way to build habits, it's a way to think about building habits. All right, here's one way to think about it. I call this the 3 R's. This is very similar to what's mentioned in Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, which is a good book to read if you'd like a little overview. The basic idea is that there are 3 phases of building any new routine into your life. First, there's the reminder, okay? And the reminder is the thing that triggers the habit, the thing that initiates the behavior. It's a cue. So for example, if my phone rings, that could be a reminder. The second piece is the reward, or is the routine itself, the actual habit, right? The action that you're performing. So phone rings, that's a reminder. I answer the phone, that's the routine. The third piece is the reward. And this is the benefit that you get for doing the behavior. Now, when we're trying to build new habits, when we're trying to think about how to initiate these things into our life, the important pieces to focus on are the reminder and the reward. Because if you can figure out how to give the right incentive, the right benefit for doing the behavior, it becomes more easy for it to be ingrained. And if you can figure out how to trigger the behavior, which we're going to talk about in a moment, that may be the most powerful way to initiate new behaviors and habits. I'm going to give you multiple examples of that in a moment. So let's talk about practical ways to build these new habits. First, simplicity. Start incredibly small. The reason that we want to start incredibly small is that there is some type of friction in the beginning. And the bigger the habit is, the bigger the friction is to start that behavior. So if you were going to break it down in 3 simple steps, and this comes from the Tiny Habits program by BJ Fogg, which is free if you'd like to take it, you really want to geek out on this stuff. tinyhabits.com is where that's at. But start with a habit that's incredibly easy for you. Increase your habit, but in a very small way. And then keep it easy and break the habit down as needed. Sounds super simple, sounds really basic. In practice, it's much harder to do because we often talk ourselves into biting off much more than we can chew, right? Nobody wants to make 3 free throws today, they want to shoot 300. But if you can start with 3 and increase to 4 and then increase to 5, then you can start to build a system of behavior, and you focus on building the pattern first rather than focusing on the results. And that's what we're talking about when we say put the system before the goal. So this is a way of thinking about that friction point in the beginning, right? The amount of motivation you need to complete a habit drastically decreases as the habit is completed. Let's say you want to go on a run after work, right? The hardest part is getting your shoes on and getting out the door. Once you do that and you start running, you go the first mile, might as well run back and finish it, right? Like I'm already halfway here. So the amount of motivation you need at that point is nil. You've already done it, right? The hard part is getting started. And so if you can do multiple things to make this easier. First, you can make the habit smaller, right? That's what we're talking about right now. Let's make the habit as small as possible, reduce the friction needed, so I don't need to rely on motivation and willpower to execute this behavior. The second thing that you can do is design your environment to make it easier to get started. You want to go for a run, lay your shoes and your clothes out the night before. You don't have to make that decision, right? Just reduce the amount of friction points in front of you for performing that behavior. And we'll talk about environment design later. Basically, you want to make it so easy that you can't say no to it. So when you're building a new habit, if it's hard enough that you could possibly not feel motivated, you don't have enough willpower to execute on it, it's too hard, too big in the beginning, right? Make it so easy that you can't say no to start, and then escalate and improve from there. All right, let's talk about habit triggers. Remember, a reminder or a cue is the first piece of the habit routine. It's the first piece of that three-step loop. Triggers are an incredibly important way to initiate new habits in your athletes and yourself and your coworkers, your spouse, whoever it happens to be. So we have cold hit triggers and we have hot triggers. Triggers are the cues that prompt behavior. A hot trigger can be acted upon right now. Let's say you're driving down the road and you see a billboard and it says, go visit jamesclear.com. You can't do anything at that moment because you're busy driving. That's a cold trigger. Meanwhile, if I send you a text and say, hey, here's a link to my latest article, you can click on it and read right away. That's a hot trigger, something you can do immediately. So often, when we want to build new habits, we ask people to do it by trying to trigger them in a cold way. If you trigger people in a hot way, they can actually do the behavior right then, rather than having to remember to perform it later. So this is BJ Fogg's, this is how he summarizes building habits. He says this is all you need. Put hot triggers in the path of motivated people. If you can do that, then you can build new behaviors. You get the right group in the room who's motivated to perform an action, and then you ask them to perform a habit that they have the ability to do right then. There are 5 types of triggers, okay? I'll give you an example for each. First, time. So my writing routine, I publish a new article every Monday and Thursday. It doesn't matter how good or how bad I feel about the article. It doesn't matter if I think it's going to make it into a book someday. It doesn't matter if people like it or if they don't like it. It doesn't matter if it's 5 words or 500 words or 5,000 words. It gets published on Monday and Thursday. Time is the trigger. That's the thing that drives the habit. That's the thing that drives the behavior. Location. When I go to the gym each week, I get there and I do the same routine. I set my gym bag down, I take my lifting shoes out, I put them on, I put on my knee wraps, I put on my wrist wraps, I go get a drink of water, I do 10 squats without the bar, 10 squats with the bar, and then I start my workout. It's the same routine, same habit every single time. And the gym, the location, is what drives that habit. Preceding events. When I sit down to dinner each night, I have a daily gratitude habit where when I sit in the chair, that's the preceding event, I say one thing that I'm grateful for that happened that day. I didn't think this was going to be an important habit when I started it. I've been doing it for 3 years straight now, and it's crazy how that one little thing can reset your entire day, and the cumulative effect of always having something to say that you're grateful for, how big of a role that plays on your day and your psyche and your mindset. Emotional state. This one's a hard one, but we often see it with bad habits, right? You get angry, you get frustrated, you get upset, and the emotional state triggers some kind of response. Mano was talking yesterday, you get frustrated while you're driving, you get distracted, you get busy, and then all of a sudden, you're making choices that you didn't think you would or are hoping you wouldn't. I sometimes find this when I'm holding tension in myself. If I feel really tense, if I feel uptight, if I feel stressed, I try to use that emotional state when I'm aware of it as a reason to do my breathing routine. And we've talked about breathing exercises a little bit before. I do a really simple one. It's just breathe in for a count of 3, hold for 1, breathe out for a count of 5, and then I just repeat that for a minute or so. So 3, 4, 5 times. If you do that, and you can do that anywhere, it completely resets the energy that you have. So that breathing routine is great. Other people, this one is fascinating. The people that we surround ourselves with dictate our habits and behavior, even if they're not physically by us. There's a really famous study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it found that if you have a friend, even if they live anywhere within 500 miles of you and they are obese, you are 57% more likely to be obese yourself. You don't even have to be around them, you just have to be associated with them. So this social network and these ties can drastically change the type of triggers, the type of habits that you form, the type of behaviors that you fall into. Here's an exercise that you can use when you go away from here. If you're thinking, all right, how do I make this practical? How do I actually use this in my own life? So you're gonna write 2 columns. You're just gonna do a little T-chart right down the middle of the paper, okay? On the left-hand side, I want you to list all the things that you do each day without fail. So I brush my teeth, I wake up in the morning, I take a shower, I get dressed. There'll be a big batch in the morning when you have your morning routine, all the things that you usually do. There'll be another batch usually either when you get to work or sometime around lunch. You know, I get my car keys, I walk out to my car. You can be as detailed as you want to be. Usually another batch when you come home for dinner, and then bedtime routine and so on. But you're going to go throughout the whole day and list everything that you just normally do. Then in the second column, you're going to list all the things that happen to you each day without fail. The sun rises, the sun sets, a commercial comes on TV, a song plays on the radio, traffic light turns green, traffic light turns red, all the things that are in your normal day that just are going to happen like clockwork. What you have at this point, once you develop these 2 comprehensive lists, is a list of possible triggers that you can tie a new behavior to. So let's say that you wanted to start meditating, for example, and you saw that on your list, in your morning routine, you have make a cup of coffee. For this new habit, you can stack it on top of the old behavior and use the old behavior as the trigger. So you say, when I make my cup of coffee in the morning, then I'll meditate for 60 seconds. And so you're trying to tie the new behavior to an old behavior. The reason that this is useful neurologically, you know, the line is neurons that fire together, wire together, and so on. You're basically creating an on-ramp to this neural pathway in your brain. You've already got this habit built. You already make coffee every morning. It's already something you can count on. And because of that, let's go ahead and tie this new behavior to that same neural pathway and build it into your brain so that it's stronger and has more likelihood to stick. So select the trigger that best fits the new habit. All right. So that gives us an overview of habits. Now let's jump into the practical, like how do I actually change, how do I get started with all of this? So part 2. The first thing I'd like to talk about is in order to make a change, in order to build these new habits in your life, we first need to start thinking about what's distracting me. This is a concept called the Zeigarnik effect from an awesome researcher with the name of Bulma Zeigarnik. In the 1920s, there's a story about 4 or 5 men walk into a restaurant in Germany. They sit down to have their meal. It's a relatively complicated order. So they tell their order to the waiter, and the waiter just stands there and remembers it all by memory, and then walks off, gets the order right, brings the food back. They're really impressed. They ordered a lot of different things, and he didn't mess up anything, right? It was perfect. So they were talking about his memory. They eat the food, they leave, they finish their meal, and they walk out. One guy realizes about halfway down the street that he forgot his wallet. And so he runs back to the restaurant and goes over to the waiter and says, hey, I'm sorry I forgot my wallet. I don't know if, maybe you can help me. And the waiter looks at him and says, who are you? Do I know you? And he was like, you just served our party. We were really impressed by how great your memory was. You remember the whole meal. And the waiter looked at him and said, oh, I only remember each meal until it's served. And what we're talking about here is the Zeigarnik effect, which is the tendency to experience intrusive thoughts or to remember things or to spend our mental energy on things until that objective is completed. So we remember things that are incomplete, that are pursued and left undone. Consider for a second what type of role this could play in your life. If you're someone who does what I would call half work, where you start a project and work on it a little bit and then never end up finishing it, or you're doing a task and then you leave it undone, you look at an email and you leave it unread, you use your inbox as a to-do list, all these different things. These are open loops that you're opening in your brain over and over again. You have all this undone work that is taking up mental energy, that's using up space. You can consider your brain kind of like it's like RAM, right? Like in a computer. You're at 100% and then you start to have to remember things and you drop down to 95, 94, and you're taking yourself down, and all of a sudden, on your average day, you only have 75% of your power to put toward a task because you're so busy trying to remember all these open loops and things that you are spending energy on. So the curiosity gap is the nagging brain, basically. And if your brain is constantly nagging you, you can't put your energy best toward the next task that you're trying to perform. So here's one exercise if you want to play with this. I've struggled with this myself as well. I'm certainly not perfect in any way with this stuff. And so I forced myself to go through my inbox, and I was only allowed to read an email once. I open it, I read it, I have to respond to it or archive it. It's done. I'm not allowed. It's like a ticking time bomb. So if you want to push yourself with this, go ahead and give that a try for 10 minutes. Just try to respond to as many emails as you can in 10 minutes, and you're not allowed to do anything else except for respond to it or archive it. You aren't allowed to leave the loop open. All right, so if we understand that we have all these open loops in our brain. We have this multitasking, busy, mindset that we're dealing with, these things that we're struggling with. What's the next step that we can take, and how do we understand how this influences our behavior and decision making on a daily basis? There was a popular study done. It was written about in the New York Times not too long ago. They looked at 1,000 parole board judges. And so the criminals would come in, they would be seen by this judge, and then the judge would decide whether or not the criminal was going to be let out on parole. Now, you would think that the thing that would influence whether someone was let out of prison was the crime that they committed and the way that they served their time. But what they found was the thing that had the single biggest impact on whether someone got a favorable parole hearing was the time of day in which they were seen. And the reason that this is true, so this is what the judge's decision-making looked like, right? So at the beginning of the day, it started out you had a 65% chance of getting a favorable hearing, being released. Then, as they made more decisions and the day went on, that slowly went down to about 0. Then we have this first dotted line, this is lunch break. Judges get to take some time off, get something to eat, they come back, boom, spikes right back up to 65%. Then they make more decisions throughout the afternoon, fades back down, and give them another break, and then by the end of the day, it's just dropping off the cliff and going all the way down to 0. This is what's known as decision fatigue. The more choices that you make, the more things that you force your willpower to be used upon throughout the day, the less you have to spread around to the other tasks. You can think of willpower as like a muscle, right? The more that you have to use it, like I can sit up here and rep out curls for a little bit, but you give me 2 or 3 minutes and all of a sudden I start fading, right? And this idea is very useful when we think about building new habits and putting our energy toward our best work. How can you automate the choices and decisions in your life so you spend less time working on things that will sap your decision, that will take away your willpower, and put that more towards the events that are worthy of it? The judges here, just to wrap this thought up, so one thing that they realized, this actually was like a safety mechanism. When their willpower faded, they're like, I don't have the willpower to make a good decision at this point, so let me just say no and then make the safe call and keep everybody in prison. So that's why the choices started willing down. And we often do this in our own lives. When we don't have the willpower to take towards something, we say, I'm paralyzed, I'm just not going to choose it right now. Another thing, I wasn't going to tell this story, but since I'm on topic, has anybody seen the picture of the lion tamer who's holding like a chair up? They have like a whip and a chair. Well, the whip is just for show. It's just to make a loud noise and good for the crowd. But the chair is actually the thing that distracts the lion. When you put the chair in front of a lion's face, it sees all 4 legs at one time. And so it freezes it a little bit because it doesn't know which thing to move at first, right? It's like it paralyzes itself. We do the same thing in our own lives. You have 4 different priorities you try to work upon at once. Good luck trying to choose the right one, right? We get paralyzed at that moment because we're focusing on too many things. We're spending our energy and our attention in too many different ways. So, to talk about willpower and decision fatigue, let's think about building a new habit. You basically could say, similar to the judges' choices, it goes like this throughout the day, right? We ebb and flow. We have some peaks, we have some valleys, but your motivation is not the same all the time. If you want to build a new habit, you have 2 choices. Either you have option A, which is say, all right, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to try to build a really hard habit. I know this is going to take a lot of energy and effort and willpower. And your only choice there is to stack it at the right time of day, right? Do it first thing in the morning when your motivation and willpower is usually high. Do it when you're well rested. Don't try to do it right before lunch like the judges would, because then you have 0% chance of completing the habit. Or you have option B, which is to go back to what we talked about before. Start with an incredibly small habit, a habit that's so tiny that you don't even need motivation and willpower to complete it. It doesn't matter at what point in the day you are, because you're going to be able to stick to it regardless. So the key idea here is willpower is like a muscle, and like any muscle in the body, willpower can get fatigued. So be careful about how you're using it and when you're asking yourself to do something that requires a lot of willpower to execute. All right, this comes back to the point about the lion and having too many priorities. This is a quote from a book called Essentialism. I thought it was pretty good, actually. So the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s. Before that, it didn't even exist. And for the next 500 years, it was just priority. It was only in the last century that we started having priorities and making it plural, right? And this idea that we can suddenly go from having one most important thing to 10 most important things is a complete myth that our busy, industrialized, technologically empowered culture has started to embrace for some reason. But you can't change the laws of physics. You can't bend reality, as he says, right? You can only have one most important thing, and the way that we operate and the way that we divide our energy and push our energy around has not changed, even if we're defining it in a different way. So, given that, how do we decide what priorities to focus on? How do we decide what to whittle out and what to cut down? Warren Buffett has a strategy that I find relatively interesting and useful. Buffett is probably the most famous investor of the last 100 years and certainly one of the most successful of all time. And this story comes directly from his personal pilot, Mike Flint, who was telling this story to a friend of mine. So Mike Flint has been Warren Buffett's personal pilot for a while. He's also flown Air Force One. He's flown multiple U.S. presidents. He's an accomplished guy. And he was telling Buffett, hey, Warren, you should really get this new plane. It's pretty sick. I'd like to be able to fly this thing. You should buy this at some point. And he was like, I'd love to be able to fly in this, in the next 5 or 10 years. And apparently Warren looked at Mike Flint and said, if you're still flying for me in 10 years, then I probably have failed you as a boss because you're not growing enough, right? You haven't grown out of this. And if I'm serious about developing you, then we're gonna need to do that. So what I want you to do is sit down and write the top 25 priorities that you have for yourself for the next 10 or 15 years. And this exercise I'm about to share, you can do this on any timeline, right? You can do 25 priorities for your career, you can do 25 for this month, 25 for this year, whatever works for you. So Mike Flint goes off, writes down his 25 priorities. He comes back and takes a look at Warren Buffett and says, here's the list, I got it. And he says, all right, good. I want you to circle the top 5. I want you to focus on the 5 priorities that are most important. You go ahead and circle those, take a little bit of time. Goes off and does that, brings the list back. And he's like, okay, tell me how you're gonna deal with this now, Mike. What are you gonna do? He says, well, I've selected my top 5 most important priorities, so I'm gonna go ahead and focus on those, and then the rest of this list will be kind of like my backup plan, right? On weekends, or when I have extra time, or when a project stalls, I'll work on the other stuff. And Buffett said, no, you got it all wrong. This list of numbers 6 through 25 is your never do under any circumstance list. And the reason, it took me a while to grasp why this is so important. The things that we love that are not the most important are the easiest to rationalize spending time on and distracting us from the things that are really important, right? The things that are good but not great, that's the stuff that ends up taking us off course. It's not that we don't really want something. It's not that we don't really want to improve, or we don't know exactly what the most important thing is to us. It's that we choose to spend our time on numbers 6 through 25 too often. We choose to make these rationalizations for, this is a decent use of time. I'm not really wasting time, right? I'm not sitting around watching a bad TV show or something. I'm working on something relatively important. But that's the stuff that pulls away from greatness. So what I like to think about, come back to that rose bush. I'm not much of a gardener, but gardeners tell me that if you want a rose bush to blossom, to fully bloom, to become the most they can be, you have to prune away buds, right? You can't just let everything grow unpruned. And in order to do that, that means you have to cut away buds that could blossom into something. They could become a full-grown flower. They could look good. So these are good ideas that you have to clip away, but you have to prune those out of your life if you want to truly be great, if you want to focus on flourishing to the biggest degree. So, pruning away these ideas and using Buffett's strategy of this 25-5 rule is one way to cut out the things that are in your life that are distracting you from greatness. Another way, and this is on a daily basis, so you can think of Buffett's as like a longer timeline, it's like a strategy, and then this Eisenhower box is how do I run my day-to-day activities. So if you want, I put together a Google Doc where you can download either a PDF version or just use an online version of the Eisenhower box. You can download that at jamesclear.com/ebox if you want a copy of it. But you can also just write it on your paper. The basic idea, President Eisenhower used this daily, supposedly, when he was running the United States and throughout his illustrious career as a military official. You have 4 different boxes, right? You have important and urgent. These are the things, this is the do category, stuff you need to get done right today. It's always important and it needs to be done, it's on fire. The next category is not urgent, but it is important. This is the category that we often overlook. These are the things I know I should be doing. I know they're good habits. I know I should be going to the gym more often, but I just can't seem to make time for it. This is the stuff that you need to decide when to do. You need to schedule it at some point. The next is not important, but urgent. This is the stuff that pulls us away a lot of the time. These are the fires, the daily emergencies, the things that pop up, right? I need to go pick my kids up from school, somebody got sick, I have to take them to the hospital. There's all sorts of things that are urgent, but not necessarily the most important way to be spending your time and energy. Then there are things that are not important and not urgent. These should just be deleted, right? But a lot of the time we have one or two of these have somehow crept in, and we're still spending our time on it because inertia and momentum, and we just happen to keep doing that, but we shouldn't be. So this little box can be a useful way to think about where am I spending my time today, and is that in the right category? So the key idea here is that busy does not equal important, and urgent is not the same thing as necessary. Just because something is urgent doesn't mean it needs to get done. So filter out the fluff, focus on what matters. In order to do this, so you may be thinking at this point, all right, I want to focus on the most important stuff, but I still have a lot of priorities. I still have a lot of stuff that sounds important to me. I still would like to build all these new habits. How do I decide what to stick to first? In this case, I would suggest keystone habits. A keystone habit is a type of behavior that you perform that filters into your life in many other ways. I'll give you a couple examples. So one keystone habit for me is working out. If I go to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all sorts of things happen. First, I get the benefits of strength training, so yes, that's good. That's what most people think you're going there for. But when I come back, I have an hour of solid focus, right? I get kind of that post-workout high where you have really clear thinking. So my focus is improved. I tend to eat better when I work out. I don't know why, I just don't want to waste it. I guess, I could, eat ice cream if I wanted, but I just kind of feel like I have a good streak going, so might as well continue eating well too. Nutrition improves. I sleep better that night because I'm tired and I've worked my body hard. I wake up the next day and I have better energy because I slept well. So at no point was I trying to build better focus habits, nutrition habits, energy habits, sleep habits, but all of those things came as a consequence of this one keystone habit. So if you're looking for a way to get started in a very practical way, think about what the keystone habit could be for you. Some popular examples, weightlifting's mine. Meditation is another one that you commonly hear CEOs talk about. If I get my daily meditation habit in, then everything is much easier for me. Walking, going on a daily walk is a very common one, especially for artists if they need some creative time. If they do their daily walk each day, the rest of it kind of flows. Visualization is a common one. You'll hear comedians say things like, I rehearse the greatest performance I've had right before I step out onto stage, or I visualize having a successful speech right before I step onto the stage. So those type of visualization techniques can be useful as well. But think about what you do on days when you perform at your best. That'll give you an insight into what your keystone habit could be. All right, part 3.